Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven and WNHH-FM. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. We've got two great guests today to talk about one of the pressing issues of the day, the future of policing in New Haven, in Connecticut, and in our country. These are two people who have lived that question, continue to live it, and explore that question. We have the pleasure today of retired State Trooper James Scott, retired at New Haven Assistant Police Chief John Valleca, who are co-teaching a police and community relations course at Albertus Magnus College and have stayed with their hand in policing. Welcome, gentlemen, and thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Well, great to be here.
Good afternoon. Thank you for having us.
Well, thanks for coming on. So before we get into it, let me ask you, where are we with policing today? We just heard about the tragic shooting of the federal agents in South Florida. We don't know what that's connected to at this point, but because that was a call on a child violence case. But we know that it's on the front burner, this question. Where are we right now with police community relations in America?
All right, Jim.
I think we have a unique opportunity to make some changes because there is so much attention and focus on this topic. In regards to police reform, there's a lot of attention on police training. So we really have a unique opportunity to change the trajectory and to make some improvements.
And let me ask you, what kind of improvements need to be made? Because you see it from both sides, right? You've been a trooper, but you're also teaching this. Do we have a problem with how policing is done? Are you sympathetic to the national protest for defunding the police or taking jobs that don't involve violence out of their hands and in the hands of community crisis teams? Or do you think it's a matter of training police better in de-escalation? Or do you think there's just not a problem? I mean, what is it that needs to be addressed?
I think we definitely can make some improvements in regards to a crisis intervention. I don't particularly support the term defund the police. Maybe we want to afford them some additional tools, some additional resources to help them do the complex job that they're called to do. Did you want to add something, Jim?
One thing we noticed, and John will probably weigh in on this, it's interesting to watch the politics of the Black Lives Matter movement. I've been noticing this year, anything that happens in this country, whether it's an insurrection at the Capitol, a pandemic, Black Lives Matter, it happens in warped time. Stories that used to unfold and movements used to unfold over years unfold in days, and then they're kind of done. So at first, there was a majority of this country that was heavily in support of Black Lives Matters after the George Floyd killing. And the mass demonstrations, a lot of Republicans and independents saying Black Lives Matters. And then came the fight back by Trump and the Republicans and Fox News. So all of a sudden it became divisive again. And we went back to our old fault lines where Black Lives Matter actually became a taunt against Democrats running for election in the fall. But what happened on the ground here in New Haven, where of course people support the Black Lives Matter movement, the mayor at first was all for defund the police because that's what demonstrators were saying. Then he went out into neighborhoods, and I'm talking about Black and Latino neighborhoods, low income neighborhoods. And the last thing those neighborhoods wanted was a defunding of police. They wanted police not to beat them up. They wanted there to be accountability for the occasional cop who breaks the law or doesn't treat them right. But they wanted more police. There's been a spate of violence. So how do we tease this out? You said you don't like the term defund the police. What about the concept? Do we need more cops, fewer cops, different kind of cops? What do you think, John?
We've spoken over the past 5 or 6 years about this, and I'm always a proponent for less police officers. That's my personal opinion. I think that more police officers in the area inevitably lead to more arrests, and usually those arrests are low level, non-violent arrests, and we see people incarcerated, families broken up behind those arrests. I just don't think that the the juice is worth the squeeze, as we say, putting a lot of cops into these areas. And the other thing is these neighborhoods belong to the people, right? Not that police, we shouldn't be an occupying force within somebody's neighborhood to dictate how they live. We should be there when they need assistance, right? But putting cops on every corner is not something where it appears as if you're offering assistance. It appears as if you're trying to control the actions of the people within the neighborhood. I agree with, I don't like the term defunding the police. I think that's a bad term. I do believe in reallocating funds in certain areas towards different initiatives. But I would have to say, a lot of times, Paul, we've been through this, for many years here in New Haven. It's the political incentive du jour that never really pans out and never really keeps going afterwards. And we seem to waste a lot of money doing that. So I'd like to see intelligent spending of the money. Right. And I think right now we are, the areas of policing, right? When we talk about the reform area, professional area, the community policing area, we're at the brink of a start of another era in policing, my personal opinion. We can't keep policing the way we've been policing. We certainly, and Jimmy and I talk about it all the time, is the accountability level went from probably when Jimmy and I started to barely there to like almost non-existent now. I think police supervisors are afraid to make enemies of their subordinates, so they just don't hold them in check for the things that they're doing wrong. They're afraid of being sued. They're afraid of the union, and you just can't do that job effectively if you're going to worry about losing friends. It's not a popularity contest, and I think that's has a lot to do with it. And I think our training hasn't changed in a long time. But that's what Jimmy Scott, and then there's another guy over there, Mike Gary, who's a New York City cop over at Albertus. And then the program is headed by a guy named John Lowry, who did 20 years in corrections, right? So everybody's a practitioner. And, John and Mike have terminal degrees. Jimmy's working towards his, and I just got my master's. So we're more guys that came out of the field, Paul, so to speak, and we kind of see that training hasn't changed in a very, very long time. Right, training has not changed in decades, and we're trying to put a curriculum together over here that not only educates our students, but the end goal is hopefully, the police academies and corrections academy will start to pull some of our ideas as well.
Okay, Jimmy, you wanted to go in on this.
Sure. I also think it's important that we reevaluate how we define good police work. I'm sure John can speak to this probably better than I can. When you go to ComStat meetings, a lot of times the only statistics that seem to be of importance are, how many arrests did we make? How many guns did we get? While that stuff is relevant, but we should also be equally concerned is how many positive interactions do we have with citizens? Unfortunately, you can't measure how much crime that reduced, but it's equally as important.
Yeah, that is tough to quantify, and we have such a data-driven society, and I wonder whether we've overdone this data fetish. But
well, I can tell you one reason, Paul, is that any kind of grant, and we've talked about this before. A lot of the grant monies, a lot of the money we get outside of our budgeted money, is driven by data, right? So if I don't have money to set, so if I apply for a grant and I say I have a whatever the problem may be, motor vehicle problem, hypothetically, let's say. Or theft, auto theft, right? Well, I need to present numbers that are going to back that up. Also, I'm not going to get money, and if I get any money at all, it's going to be reduced, right? So, what do you do prior to that? Say you want to run a DUI roadblock on certain, and you need money for that. You have to show that DUI is an issue in your jurisdiction. You have to do that by showing, look, we had multiple arrests for that. So. Which is a very dicey game when you start to play that game,
We're talking about the future of policing in our city, in our country. The retired state trooper James Scott and retired New Haven Assistant Police Chief John Vallecca, they teach political community relations at Albertus Magnus College. John brought up some points we've talked about over years in New Haven, and on which ideas seem to evolve. He said you don't want too many police out there because that leads to arrests. And that's what has been the new critique, especially of New York style community policing. You're making these low level arrests. You're out there to cause trouble. We don't need cops all the time. A fundamental tenet of community policing was the opposite. You want a lot of cops out there getting to know neighbors so you know who's who. And one thing that really got lost in New Haven, because community policing was done differently in New York and places like that, is that we were supposed to see arrests as a last resort and failure. But there's the broken windows theory. That's the core of community policing. If you don't address little problems, they become big problems. They show that if the broken window shows there's disorder, then people will move on to robberies and muggings and murders. One of the tensions all along has been, does that mean you arrest the squeegee guy in New York, or do you do outside of arrest and solve problems without arrest? I'm obviously showing my bias. I think broken window could be interpreted as not with arrests, but have police help solve problems. Or do you try to make a lot of small level arrests? Is there a third way? Is that an outdated way of thinking? Because I mean, John, there are other reasons John brought up, like about budget. We don't have enough money to put a lot of people out. But are we giving up on the idea of having a lot of cops on the street, getting to know people and trying to find ways other than arrest to solve problems?
I think that, you know, community policing as it was redefined when Janet Reno was the attorney general and Bill Clinton was in, and all the money was coming through cops. Well, it was, there was a certain definition and there were certain tenets to community policing, and they were derived from something that, you know, Robert Peel put in place 100 years before, right? But and listen, I agree with the 9 tenets of community policing as well. I think they hold fast as they do back then. However, operationally, we certainly can't police the way we did 100 years ago. And that's the why I say, when we talk about tethering ourselves to walking beats and a million cops in a certain jurisdiction, that's the old way of doing business. So take, for example, you don't need as many cops. Jimmy brought up a great, in class last week, he says, you know, and the wave of the future is that you're going to see police officers, or maybe even not even sworn personnel, Paul, taking minor complaints this way via Zoom. You're not even going to see a police officer if you have your car is broken into, or you have a burglar in your house and you can't point out any areas of evidence. This is the way business is going to be done. So it's going to be less police officers. And I can say, we've talked about it before too, the biggest critique of the broken windows theory was it packed the jails full of low-level, nonviolent offenders, because the reality is the bail system is not in a place where it can accommodate so many people like that, because people are getting bonded for $500 and they're not making that. And then
Right,
they're
the bail
staying in
thing's
jail
broken.
for Crowder is a good example.
Right, it's taking people's liberty away because they're poor. But in New Haven, we, at least for a
Right.
while, until we kind of went backwards on it in the 90s, for later 90s, we had it for a while, the theory that broken windows meant not arresting. Like, I'm thinking in the Hill one day, Robert Strickland is an officer. He saw these kids were bothering drunks on the corner. He found them a mattress, and they were jumping off a mattress. He got them a trampoline, that kind of thing, and solving problems. What about this fundamental idea of broken windows? So John talked about one way it's broken windows became an epithet from people who used to like it because it became a way to harass people for small offenses. But Trooper Scott, do you feel that there's still a future for broken windows policing? Do you think is it an outdated notion to have lots of walking beat cops who know a lot of people, if we could have the money to do that?
I think it's important that police officers don't forget that they have discretion. Sometimes we get locked in a box and think that we have to make an arrest or we have to give the ticket. And a lot of times that's not the case. Also, when we talk about police reform, we have to look at it at the whole system, the police, the courts, as well as corrections. The focus seems to be primarily on the police, but it can't just be on the police. We also have to think about, what are we doing to help people, returning citizens, to reintegrate back into society? Are we giving businesses incentive to hire formerly incarcerated people? I mean, if we're not giving people tools for success, then the likelihood for recidivism is a lot higher, and they may have contact with law enforcement.
Well, you mentioned training, Trooper Scott. You'd like to see training change. John talked about this too. You just mentioned the idea that you don't have to make arrests just as you can. John and I joke about how they should ban, maybe not joke, interfering as a charge, because that just means I'm mad at you and I'm going to jam you up with charges. What other changes would you like to see specifically in training of police officers? How would you like to see that field evolve?
Just reinforcing discretion, maybe even some changes on how infractions are administered, like motor vehicle infractions. You know, maybe the first time you get a headlight, you get stopped for a headlight, maybe you shouldn't be able to get a ticket that's monetary for something so minor. Because a lot of times we may think it's not that big a deal. I don't know what the price is now. I think it might be like $92. But for somebody who doesn't have it, whether it's $92 or $900, if you can't pay it, you can't pay it. And for some people, that begins the cycle where they don't pay it. And then now maybe they get a failure to pay or plea, and it just snowballs from there. So maybe we need to reimagine some of those things as well, too.
What about the demands you hear? How do you balance this with demands from neighborhoods? And, policing, we dump a lot of problems at the doorsteps of police that society isn't solving, and you got to go clean it up. What about demands from neighborhoods that say, stop being so rough with us and over policing us and show up? There are people shooting people. I mean, we've had 5 murders already in 1 month in New Haven. All across the country, violence is up. How should we be responding to that in light of how you think policing should evolve?
I'll take that one. Well, shootings, much of my career is spent in shootings, Paul, you know that. What I say is the reality of the situation is if somebody is hell-bent on shooting you, Paul, there's very little the police can do about that, right? Can you do targeted gun enforcement? Well, not to the effect anymore in New Haven with the police accountability bill that bans motor vehicle searches. So there's a hiccup for the cops. They're gonna have to get around that. But the reality is, you need to have it, and I don't know if New Haven is going away from that. I haven't been there in 10 years, obviously, but you need to keep your intelligence unit. That should be one of your more important units, your intelligence unit, because your intelligence unit is going to tell you who you're looking for, long story short. So when you can go out and conduct targeted investigations, you're not rolling up on a corner and shaking down everybody and looking for the gun that falls out of somebody's pants. You know where you're going, you know what you're doing, because you've already acquired this intelligence through a number of different ways. Look, information right to this day is readily available through social media. A lot of these kids who are committing these crimes, this 18 to 25-year-old demographic, they don't really watch what they put on social media. A lot of information can be gained through an intelligence unit. And to be honest, well, we've seen it work before. You need an intervention team like street outreach workers or a crisis intervention team, because there are people that will tell the police officers when will know when something's going to happen, but they might not necessarily tell a police officer, where they will tell, a friend of theirs on the street, hoping it gets to the right area, But, we talk about, and you and I have had these discussions for over and over and over. When we talk about shootings and murders, it's strange the way the community is ebbs and flows, and it's stigmatized by that small fraction of crime. And I remember I used to say to you, if you want to tell me about a good neighborhood, tell me the one that's got no burglaries or property thefts, because those are the ones that are secure. You're going to have your occasional violent crime. There's not a lot you can do about that. But it's crime in general. It's the numbers of crime in general that I think we can affect more than we can affect the isolated violent incident.
Okay, I wonder, maybe Chief Sky take this one. John brought up technology. First of all, talk about intelligence gathering, but that's a key. And one thing that's really different from both of you started policing is how the tech revolution. We probably have, in the 20 years since your guys' careers began, 20 plus, we've probably gone 200 years ahead in technology. So there are opportunities and there are dangers, especially if you're going to rely heavily on intelligence. Drones, facial recognition technology, 2 tools that now are being used much more heavily by law enforcement across the country. Some towns, cities in the country have banned the use of facial recognition technology. They worry that, especially people of color, it doesn't read them as well, but also people's privacy they're worried about. And drones, they're worried about privacy. I remember Tony Hart ran for mayor against drones being used in a community like to try to catch dirt bikers. But other people say that's the best way. Drones are out in public, and as long as you do them safely where they're not going to crash, that's how we'll catch these people get away being lawless and bothering people. And the facial recognition technology can help catch people. Where do you stand on that? With those two tools and technology in general?
I think drones can be a great asset to a police department, but like anything else, you have to balance civil liberties when you're using any type of enhanced technology. But without even really thinking hard, a couple of things come to mind. I've been in several high-speed pursuits on the highway. If you had a drone up in the air, it'd be much easier to follow the car that you might be looking for, as opposed to having multiple vehicles in a pursuit. Or if somebody falls in a body of water, you can use a drone to drop them a life preserver. Fatal accident scenes, you can use the drone technology to help take photos. Chemical spill. I mean, there's so many benefits to utilizing a unmanned aerial vehicle.
Hey,
As
where would
far
the
as
pitfalls go? How would you restrict drone use, if at all?
I think we'd have to be very careful if we're trying to use it solely for the purpose of just general surveillance, just to fly over neighborhoods and just, for example, take pictures of who's on the corner, who's hanging out at what times.
What if,
I
okay,
think
and I'm obviously sympathetic to your position on this, but I want to ask you a devil's advocate question. That's sort of the dilemma cops get. They say, don't harass and over police us. Get rid of these drug dealers. Why can't you get rid of them? And you guys always come back saying, you can't just say you're a drug dealer, you're arrested. You actually got to get the evidence and make the case, which isn't so easy, and they know how to evade. So why wouldn't drones be a good way to show them conducting drug sales?
I just think we have to be careful. We just have to be mindful of civil liberties. Of course, legal affairs has to look at your policy and usage of it, and how are we going to now store that data. So for me, that's kind of where the comfort zone is. I would be very
So you're saying it's
careful in
an
that
easy
type of use.
call on pursuits, emergencies, someone's drowning, a crash, a chemical spill. What's going on in the corner is tricky because you don't want to have mass surveillance of a neighborhood. Everyone's being watched and their info is being stored. But is there another side? Would it be good to use it in, is there a way to do it safely and respecting civil liberties so that you'd also have evidence of people dealing drugs?
I think the argument could be made that there might be an effective way to do it, because in some neighborhoods, there are already cameras that monitor intersections and monitor certain sections of town. So it would be very similar. I just think we have to be very careful.
Would storage be a key issue here? Like, you're right. Anytime there's a crime now, sort of the fate of an investigation is whether there was a functioning video camera at the store on the corner, right? And that's the Hamden police shooting. It was video that really helped us there. Would you be more comfortable with this if there were strict storage rules, or do you think it just would be add this inexorable blanketing of surveillance of neighborhoods is getting to be too dangerous?
No, I think there should be some limits on the storage as well. And again, with this technology, we also have to think about the back end costs when we start talking about storage. I know one of the things in the accountability bill is, as far as, police recording their activity. It's great to mandate this stuff, but there has to be the financial resources to support the back end. It's cheap to
Yeah.
get the equipment, but to store it, and not only to store it, I think a lot of times people don't realize, well, if there's 6 cops at a scene, there's 6 different body cameras. Somebody has to sit and watch this video, perhaps redact certain portions, and then, make a copy of it. So there's a lot of
Well, it
unintended
shouldn't be
costs that a
cops
lot of
doing it,
people
right?
don't think about when they say, oh yeah, I want cops to have cameras on them in the cars. Okay, well, where's the money coming from?
And also, it doesn't have to be cops handling all that. And it often helps the cops more than hurts to have the video, because so often someone's made a false charge, or you're seeing it from the police officer's perspective. I mean, it's sort of when the unintended. You're listening to Dateline New Haven, WNHH FM. We're talking about the future of policing with 2 people who know a lot about its past and future. James Scott, John Valeka. They've had long careers in law enforcement, and they're teaching criminal justice at Albertus Magnus College. John Valeka. The second point I brought up about how technology is changing policing and what questions arise from it involved facial recognition technology. some departments have gone whole hog in that in the country, and there are a whole bunch of objections as well. But what do you think about that? Because you talked about the importance of using intelligence to identify the small number of people you're going after. Is that a good tool for that? A dangerous tool for that?
Well, I would have to say I would, excuse me, I'd advocate for the use of facial recognition technology over a drone. I'm not a proponent of drones. I think I spoke to you about. It's not because they don't work. It's because they work all too well. The capabilities are so vast. I just don't know how you would be able to rein all those in under a policy and make sure that that policy was being
So you wouldn't use them at all?
adhered to.
So you
I
would
would
be
use.
against
I think
drones
the
at all?
drone has a. I think the drone has a place with the fire department. I don't think it has a place within criminal investigations, because now if you start to say, you know, you're looking at drug dealers on the corner, which really doesn't even happen anymore. But let's say hypothetically it did. I could do that through surveillance, right? Now, Jimmy brought up the high-speed chases, absolutely dropping a life preserver or some, all those emergency service type, life-saving initiatives. I agree, and the drone should be used for that.
Wait a second,
But-
John. Wait a second. High-speed chase, he was talking about policing. Now, we all kind of come to agree that it's not a good idea. Usually have high-speed chase. It's not safe.
Right. In other words,
What about Trooper Scott's point that could save lives and catch more of these people if the drone could watch where the driver goes? That's cops. That's not fire.
Right. No, and I misspoke. I'm going to break that up. I would say even in a high-speed chase, I don't advocate for drone use. I don't advocate for drones with the police at all. That might be it's a little bit of a break from Jimmy, but we.
No, that's good. But why
have
not
different
in the
opinions.
high-speed chase? What is your objection in the high-speed?
I don't. Well, my personal opinion is I don't want to open the door for drone use in policing. Period. End of story. Because I think that could go to, where does it begin and end? Is my problem with that, right? And sure, we could develop these codes and policies, but a policy is only paper unless it's being followed and enforced. And we're having enough time right now enforcing the bare minimum policies. And now you're going to add in something as some with moving parts in it. My personal opinion is, I think the benefits. I mean, the damage it can do to civil liberties outweighs the benefits for me. Should the fire department have it? Yes, I believe, like in life-saving instance, I think they can use a drone, right? And they should be. We shouldn't ditch the drone completely, I guess is what I'm saying.
So how about facial recognition? Now I'm so interested in this because these are tough questions that don't have easy answers and that don't divide left, right. It's like, how does it work on the ground that we just saw with the drones? Facial recognition has a couple of objections, one of which is racial. Now that perhaps could be fixed eventually. Maybe when they develop this, it wouldn't just be white people and Asian American people developing the technology and disproportionately using people of their races. But Trooper Scott, how do you feel about the facial recognition technology as a tool?
As long as it's used as a tool, as part of an investigation, but not the singular thing that probable cause is based on to make an arrest.
Now, people, as you know, people of color are very concerned that they just get suspected. A lot of Black people in particular have been rounded up, treated roughly as suspects. It turned out facial recognition was way off. Concerns about that?
Absolutely. That's why I wouldn't want it to be the sole factor. That would just maybe be another layer in an already comprehensive investigation that could stand alone by itself, absent that.
How about you, John?
I think you summed it up well. I think using it as part of an overall investigation, there could be a good use for that. But I don't think you should be using that solely.
What do you see as the benefits? Because now, John, earlier we talked about outdated notions of policing. You can't do what Peel did in England 100 years ago. But even in 1990, when we said the theory is lots of cops walking the beat, getting to know people, is it because of budgets that's no longer realistic? Is it because of the unintended consequences of mass incarceration over small offenses and the distrust that engendered in urban communities? Or is it just because technology is changing how we function as a society and what's the best way to connect with people?
I think that's a lot to do with it. Really, you were out and active when we were out there in the 90s, and you don't see a full Congress Avenue, so to speak, the way you used to, right? The way you would see it on an August, first week in August, you couldn't even drive down Congress. There was so many people out there, right? You don't really see that. People are in their houses, a lot of them on the computer. A lot of the drug dealing now is, taking place via the internet or the cell phone via text, and they're meeting up on a side street in Hamden. And the deal occurs when the cars meet up and something goes from the driver's side window into the passenger side window of the other car, and then they take off. It's not like it used to be. But like I've said before, I think community policing is a philosophy, right? It's not a program. It's not like, okay, here's our walking beat officers for today. So what you guys need to do is go out there and talk to people and this and that. I think that even if you're working a 911 car, you should be engaging the public, right? You should, before it was even mandated, Paul, a lot of times you worked in a certain neighborhood, you parked your car, you walked around, you walked to get a sandwich, you ate it, you talked to somebody.
You and I've
Somebody
talked
else
about
would
this
come
on
up here.
previous episodes of the show. We talk about a cop was not going to engage people. You can call him a one cop who'll hide in the corner and not talk to anybody. And a cop who
Right.
likes people and engages people gets out of the car. But what about, I'm really interested in what you just brought up. Our society's different from what it was 20 years ago because of technology.
Right.
We relate to each other differently. And I think we're becoming different creatures because of our connections to the cloud and how our brains work and how we interact with each other.
That's a great point.
So you talked about human beings aren't out in public as much as they used to be. They're interacting more virtually. Crime takes place more virtually. Am I putting words in your mouth to say that's one reason why we stick with the philosophy of community engagement and avoiding bigger problems through problem solving, but not thinking of it in terms of walking beat officers?
No, you're not putting words in my mouth by saying that. I agree with you. I mean,
it's interesting that we're having this discussion because I read your newspaper weekly, Paul, and I saw not too long ago there was some discussion about whether or not police officers should or shouldn't be in schools. But that's a great opportunity for proactive, positive engagement between police, youth, the youth who are the next generation who are going to already know the cop who was in their school, and to establish those relationships. So, that's a component of that philosophy of community policing. And although people may not be on the street anymore, but once we're back in schools, kids are going to be in school and they're going to have an opportunity to interact with their SRO.
So am I putting words in your mouth to say one way it's changed is people might not be on the streets anymore, but they're in schools, which makes it more of an importance to have SROs so relationships can be formed and people can know each other?
I would say my opinion is biased because I'm a former SRO. I think there's a lot of value in the program as long as you select the right officer for the right school and you're not just assigning someone who may not want to be at that school or has no desire to work with kids. But I absolutely 100% support the initiative.
I've never heard complaints about specific officers. I'm sure it exists, but it seems like the officers who gravitate to that assignment like kids. Where were you in SRO?
Oh man, back in the 2000s.
Where?
I was at Eli Whitney Technical High School.
Tell me about that experience.
Oh, it was fantastic. I mean, to this day, in fact, I got my car serviced a couple of days ago, and I just started talking to the person who was checking me in, and ironically, it was a student from Eli Whitney from the time that I was there, and I was really amazed because I was having such a pleasant encounter compared to the last time that I was at this particular dealership, and it was really heartwarming to I went home and told my wife, I was like, hey, one of my kids was at the dealership. He's doing a great job. He probably didn't recognize me at first because I have full beard plus a face mask on now, but we started talking and reminiscing on the old days that we were in the school together. But it was great. It was great. One of the best assignments I had.
Retired Trooper James Scott, retired Police Chief John Vallecca, current professors of criminal justice at Albertus Magnus here on Dateline New Haven on WNHH FM. So the question I wanted to ask you about now had to do with the military. One question that appears to be fundamental to these debates of police community relations is whether police are warriors or guardians. And that gets tricky because so many cops come from sports and the military, and it's an inherently paramilitary organization. You Trooper Scott, have combat experience. You were in the National Guard. Is our cops true? Are they warriors? Are they soldiers? Or are they guardians?
This is just my humble opinion. I don't get hung up on the semantics of warrior and guardian. I subscribe to something that I saw on the website, and I hope I'm citing the source correctly, because in higher ed, you gotta cite properly. I think the website was Gallagher and Bassett, and they refer to 4 quadrants. You need to be a reader, writer, thinker, fighter. You have to be a reader because policing is always changing, and you have to be a lifelong learner, so you're always reading. You have to be a writer because virtually everything we do in police work generates a report, and if you get subpoenaed to court, it's going to be years later, so you need to have written a comprehensive report. You have to be a thinker, and I think I went to some training that was hosted by the John Maxwell Group, and it talked about how the actions of one police officer can impact the community for generations. So you have to be a thinker. You have to think about the long-term implications of your actions. You have to think, because you have to be compassionate. Is there another alternative? Can I take a less restrictive approach? And then the last piece, fighter. By no means do we fight every day, but the fighter piece means that you have to be willing to step into harm's way at a minute notice to protect people who you don't even know. And if you're not willing or capable of doing that, then you know that being a uniformed police officer is not the right fit in the criminal justice system for you. So I don't get hung up on these semantics over warrior versus guardian. I think you need to be a reader, writer, thinker, fighter.
John Valeka?
I agree. And I liken that to when we used to talk about the militarization of the police, right? And I said, well, the militarization of the police doesn't necessarily mean to rolling tanks out onto the New Haven Green. It's simply, the acquiring certain tools that do a better job in certain instances, right? And you have to use them responsibly. I think what we're talking about here is when people say you police officer should be a warrior, I think it's more like they should acquire the mindset of a warrior. In other words, not that they should go out there and beat people and things like that, but like what Jimmy said, if you're out there doing your job in fear, you simply can't do that, right? That results in a higher use of force than anything else does. When an officer is afraid, they use force, and that's what we see a lot. And when you talk about what the future of policing is, and it's not to disparage any of the newer police officers at all. They're a different model, I guess, than we would say. They don't. They've grown up on the internet. It's very difficult for them to engage a stranger in conversation. Very difficult to acquire information that way, and it certainly is. From what I've seen, and I can tell you, I don't mind saying, I've said it publicly before, I believe the officer in Hamden was firing out of fear that night. Every action he took that night rung of fear. Jimmy's been in situations, I've been in situations. I mean, firing your hand the way he did was somebody who's very afraid of what's going on. And I think that's what I mean, the mindset, right? The military mindset, the rules and the rank structure and stuff like that you have to keep contained to do your job effectively and professionally. But that certainly doesn't mean that, the community is the enemy and you're a soldier going into battle. And I think that's where people lose, what we mean when we say warrior.
In its simplest form, it's protect and serve. We serve the community as police officers. It's a service business, but we also have to be willing to protect the community from anybody that should want to try to do them harm.
James Scott, John Valeka, thanks for this great conversation. I want to ask you a final question. Are you optimistic about the future of police community relations in New Haven and in the country?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think more young people who are coming into the field of policing have increased levels of education, embrace diversity, and embrace the change that's happening. So I'm optimistic. I still stay in shape. So if I had to suit back up again, I would sign back up and do it again. I might be too old for most places, but It was a phenomenal career. I wouldn't change it for anything. I wouldn't discourage a young person who's considering a career in criminal justice. And if you have any questions, our door is always open at Albertus Magnus College. Whether you're a student or not a student, where there is faculty, where there is advisors, where there is former practitioners, stop in and see us, or we could do coffee with a retired cop via Zoom.
Thank you. John Valeka, optimistic?
Yeah, of course I am. I have the utmost respect for people going into the career of policing. I think that the big thing going forward is going to be leadership. I think that we need some very, very solid leaders. I think that that's something that's been diminishing over the years too across the country. You don't really have those people who are willing to stand in the fire anymore, like police chiefs used to do. And I really think that, as we go forward, well, let's look, when things get broken down and ripped down to the point where we are policing, it's simply because they needed to be rebuilt, right? We need to rebuild policing. We can't, you should always be, like Jimmy said, you should be a lifelong learner in this business. You should be constantly changing, you're constantly trying to do something better and evaluating yourself. And I think right now the community is forcing that evaluation, whether you want to have it or not. We're all gonna have to evaluate policing and come up with a different model. And the police will do that. They will.
All right. Well, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks everybody else for joining us. Thanks to Harry Drost, the miracle man behind the controls here at WNHF, the station manager. So I want to thank retired State Trooper James Scott, retired Police Chief John Valeka. They're both teaching in criminal justice at Albertus Magnus College, keeping the conversation going. We're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night. WNHH FM,
Yeah, Paul.
New Haven's home for community radio.